Hello, sleepy detectives, and welcome back. I know you're here to settle in and relax, so if you enjoy these stories, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I love knowing where our community is. Let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is where you are. Now, let's get comfortable and jump straight into tonight's story. October 31st, Halloween. In most of America, it's a night unlike any other. It's a riot of sugar and screams, a celebration of the spooky, the silly, the delightfully macabre. The streets come alive with costumed children, their laughter echoing in the crisp autumn air. Porch lights blaze, casting long dancing shadows. Doors open and close, hands dip into bowls of candy, and for a few hours the ordinary world surrenders to a playful embrace of the uncanny. It's a night of noise, of movement, of communal ritual. But on Halloween night 1986, just a short drive from the chaotic energy of New York City, there existed another world entirely. A world walled off, not just physically, but culturally and spiritually, from the frantic revelry outside. This was the world of the Mesivta of Long Beach, a prestigious Orthodox Jewish yeshiva, a boarding school dedicated to the rigorous study of the Torah and Talmud. Inside these walls, Halloween was not celebrated. It was, perhaps, barely even acknowledged. It was just another night in a life devoted to piety, discipline, and scholarship. The sounds here were not of laughter and fake screams, but of quiet contemplation, of pages turning, of murmured prayers, of footsteps echoing in long, silent corridors. It was a world ordered, predictable, and deeply insular. A sanctuary, meant to shield its young students from the perceived chaos and temptations of the secular world just beyond its gates. And it was within this sanctuary, on this night when the outside world was reveling in make-believe monsters, that a real and utterly baffling mystery was about to unfold. A mystery that began with a locked door, an empty bed, and a silence that would stretch into decades. This is the story of a boy who vanished from a place designed to keep him safe. This is the unsolved Halloween nightmare of Chaim Weiss. Chaim was 15 years old in the fall of 1986. He was, by all accounts, an exceptional young man. He came from a respected Orthodox family in Staten Island. He was known for his sharp intellect, his dedication to his studies, and his quiet, gentle nature. He was well liked by his peers and admired by his teachers, or rebbes. He was not a troublemaker. He was not rebellious. He was, in the words of those who knew him, a golden boy, destined for a life of scholarship and community leadership. Life at the Mesivta of Long Beach was demanding. The days were long, filled with intense study sessions that often stretched late into the night. The students lived in dormitories on the upper floors of the main school building. Their lives were regimented, their interactions closely monitored. It was a closed community, a brotherhood bound by shared faith and purpose. It was a world built on rules, on tradition, and on the comforting certainty of divine order. Halloween night 1986 fell on a Friday. As the secular world outside geared up for its night of costumed chaos, the students at the Mesivta were preparing for the Sabbath, Shabbos, the holiest day of the week, which begins at sundown on Friday. The atmosphere within the yeshiva was likely one of quiet anticipation, not for Halloween, but for the spiritual rest and reflection to come. Chaim Weiss was last seen by his roommates in their shared dormitory room, number Ba07, on the third floor. It was around 9:00 p.m. He was doing what he always did, studying. His roommates left the room for various reasons, perhaps to use the communal bathroom down the hall, perhaps to speak with another student. Chaim remained behind, hunched over his books at his desk, the lamp casting a pool of light on the ancient texts. What happened between approximately 9:30 p.m. that Friday night and 6:30 a.m. the following morning remains a complete and total blank. Saturday, November 1st, the Sabbath. The day began, as always, with morning prayers, shacharis, held in the yeshiva synagogue. Attendance was mandatory. Chaim Weiss, normally punctual and devout, was not there. At first, his absence likely caused little alarm. Perhaps he had overslept. Perhaps he wasn't feeling well. But as the morning progressed and he failed to appear for subsequent prayers and study sessions, a quiet concern began to ripple through the student body and faculty. This was not like Chaim. His roommates, along with the school administrator, went to his room 307. They knocked. There was no answer. They tried the door. It was locked. Not just locked with the standard key lock, but secured from the inside with the deadbolt. This was immediately strange. Why would Chaim deadbolt the door and then not respond? Peering through the small peephole, or perhaps through a crack, they could see that the light over Chaim's desk was still on. His books were still open. Everything looked normal, except Chaim wasn't visible. Growing increasingly concerned, they managed to force the door open, the deadbolt splintering the wood of the frame. They stepped inside. The room was small, sparse, typical of a dormitory. 3 beds, 3 desks. Chaim's desk lamp was indeed on, illuminating his open texts. His bed was neatly made, untouched. It had not been slept in. His tefillin, the phylacteries used for morning prayer, were laid out, ready. His clothes for the Sabbath were nearby, but Chaim was gone. They searched the small room thoroughly. The closet, under the beds. He wasn't there. They checked the window. It overlooked a lower rooftop. It was closed and locked from the inside. This was the genesis of the mystery that would baffle investigators for decades. How does a person vanish from a room that is locked from the inside, with no signs of struggle, no signs of forced entry, and no indication that they ever left? The school administration, faced with an inexplicable situation, made a decision that would later draw significant criticism. Following Orthodox Jewish law, which places strict limitations on activities during the Sabbath, including using the telephone or traveling, except in life-threatening emergencies, they waited. They waited until after the Sabbath ended at sundown on Saturday before contacting the police. This delay, while understandable within their religious context, meant that nearly 24 hours passed between Chaim's last known sighting and the official start of the police investigation. It was a critical window of time, lost forever. When the Nassau County Police Department finally arrived at the Mesivta late Saturday night, they stepped into a scene that was both pristine and utterly perplexing. They were confronted, not with a scene of violence, but with an absence, a void. Detectives examined room Bala 305. They confirmed the initial observations. The door deadbolted from within, the window locked. There were no hidden passages, no trapdoors. The room was, for all intents and purposes, a sealed box. There were no signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no bloodstains, no fibers out of place. Chaim's personal belongings were all accounted for. His wallet, his identification, his money. Everything was there, except him. The investigators were immediately faced with immense challenges. The first was the nature of the community itself. The Mesivta was, by design, insular. The students and faculty shared a deep bond, but they were also wary of outsiders, particularly secular authorities. Cooperation was offered, but communication was sometimes difficult. There was a sense, perhaps unspoken, that this was an internal matter, a tragedy that should be handled within the community. This wasn't hostility, but a cultural divide that hampered the free flow of information in those critical early days. The second challenge was the staggering lack of physical evidence. In 1986, forensic science was not what it is today. DNA analysis was in its infancy, but even by the standards of the time, the scene yielded almost nothing. No unknown fingerprints, no footprints outside the window, which would have been difficult on a rooftop anyway. No hairs or fibers that didn't belong. It was as if Chaim had simply evaporated. The police were forced to consider every possibility, starting with the most obvious. Theory 1. Chaim left willingly. Did the 15-year-old, perhaps buckling under the intense pressure of his studies or wrestling with some hidden personal turmoil, simply decide to run away? Detectives explored this avenue thoroughly. They interviewed his roommates, his friends, his rebbes. Had Chaim seemed unhappy? Had he expressed a desire to leave? The answer, consistently, was no. He was excelling in his studies. He was well-adjusted. He had recently spoken to his parents on the phone and sounded perfectly normal. Furthermore, the physical evidence argued against it. If he had run away, why leave his wallet, his money, his identification? Why leave without a change of clothes? And most perplexing of all, how did he lock the deadbolt from the inside after leaving? The only way to do that would be if someone else locked it after he was gone, or if he somehow locked it and exited through the window, a window that was found locked from the inside. The runaway theory seemed highly improbable. Theory 2. An accident. Could Chaim have met with some unfortunate accident within the sprawling grounds of the yeshiva, perhaps falling from a roof or getting trapped somewhere, and no one had found him yet? The police, along with school officials and volunteers, conducted extensive searches of the entire campus. They searched rooftops, basements, storage areas, crawl spaces. They searched the surrounding neighborhood of Long Beach. They used search dogs. They found absolutely nothing. The accident theory, while theoretically possible, lacked any supporting evidence and seemed increasingly unlikely as the days turned into weeks. This left the investigators facing the darker possibilities. Theory 3. An intruder from outside. Could someone have infiltrated the yeshiva on Halloween night, entered Chaim's room, subdued him, and taken him away without leaving a trace? This theory presented its own set of problems. How did the intruder get into the building? Security at the Mesivta was not fortress-like, but it wasn't non-existent either. How did they get into room 307, which was presumably locked while Chaim was studying? Did Chaim open the door for them? If so, why? And most crucially, how did they get Chaim out of the room and then manage to lock the deadbolt from the inside? Some speculated about picking the lock from the outside in a way that left it appearing locked from within, while using a sophisticated tool to engage the deadbolt through the doorframe. Techniques possible, but requiring a high degree of skill and leaving almost no trace. And why Chaim? If it was a random intruder, why target this specific boy in this specific room? If it was someone with a grudge against the school or the community, why take only one student, and why do it so silently? The lack of a ransom demand also argued against a typical kidnapping scenario. The intruder theory felt like grasping at straws, trying to explain the unexplainable. This inevitably led the investigation to the most difficult, most sensitive, and most controversial possibility. Theory 4. An internal actor. Could someone inside the Mesivta, another student, a member of the faculty, a staff member, have been involved in Chaim's disappearance? This was the theory that caused the most friction between the police and the yeshiva community. It was, to them, almost unthinkable. This was a place of God, a place of learning, a sanctuary. The idea that one of their own could be responsible for harming Chaim was deeply offensive and painful. Yet, detectives had to consider it. A closed community, by its nature, can sometimes hide secrets.
Were there internal conflicts, jealousies, forbidden relationships? Did Chaim know something, see something that put him in danger? Interviews with students and staff were conducted again, more pointedly this time. But the wall of silence, built perhaps not of conspiracy, but of genuine shock and fear, remained difficult to penetrate. Rumors circulated, as they always do in such cases, whispers of arguments, of clandestine meetings, but none of these rumors ever solidified into credible leads. And the central mystery remained, the locked room. If someone inside the school was responsible, how did they orchestrate the disappearance and leave the room appearing locked from within?
Did they have a master key that could override the deadbolt? Did they exit through the window and somehow lock it behind them? Or, the most chilling possibility, did the event that led to Chaim's disappearance happen inside the room, and the perpetrator then locked the door behind them as they left? This last scenario implied that Chaim might not have left the room alive, but extensive searches found no evidence of foul play within the room itself. The search for Chaim Weiss intensified in the weeks following his disappearance. His face, a serious young man in a yarmulke, was plastered on posters across New York. His family, devastated and desperate, offered a reward. The story received national media attention, framed as the baffling yeshiva mystery. Divers searched the channel near the school. Helicopters scanned the coastline. Police chased down hundreds of leads. Sightings reported from across the country. None of them panned out. Chaim Weiss had vanished as completely as if he had stepped into another dimension. As months turned into years, the case grew cold. The initial intensity of the investigation waned. Detectives retired or moved on. The file, thick with interviews and dead ends, was passed down. The Mesivta of Long Beach, scarred by the tragedy and the unwelcome spotlight, tried to return to its quiet rhythms of study and prayer. But for the Weiss family, there was no moving on. Their lives were frozen on that Halloween night in 1986. They held on to the hope, however slim, that Chaim might still be alive somewhere. Perhaps he had amnesia. Perhaps he had been abducted and was being held. They hired private investigators. They consulted psychics. They pursued every possible avenue, clinging to any shred of possibility. Over the decades, the case would periodically resurface. Anniversaries would bring a fresh wave of media attention. New detectives, assigned to the cold case squad, would review the files, hoping that fresh eyes or new technology might reveal something missed. In the 2000s, with advancements in DNA, investigators reportedly re-examined the few items taken from Chaim's room, hoping for a trace, a clue. Nothing conclusive was ever announced. The theories continued to evolve. Some speculated about connections to obscure religious factions or even international incidents, grasping for explanations beyond the simple, terrifying possibility that someone had entered that room and made a boy disappear. The locked room mystery itself became a subject of intense debate among armchair detectives. How was it done? Was it a simple trick, a key left under the door, a tool used to slide the bolt? Or was the initial report inaccurate? Was the door perhaps not deadbolted from the inside, but merely locked with the standard key, a detail lost or misreported in the initial chaos? The police maintained their stance. The room was secured from within. What makes the Chaim Weiss case so uniquely haunting, especially in the context of Halloween, is this profound contrast. On the night when the secular world celebrates chaos, costumes, and the playful blurring of reality, a real-life locked-room mystery unfolded within a place dedicated to order, truth, and divine law. It's as if the strange, unsettling energy of Halloween itself seeped through the walls of the yeshiva, leaving behind an impossible crime. Chaim Weiss was not the victim of a random street crime on a night known for mischief. He vanished from the one place he should have been safest, surrounded by his brothers in faith, within walls meant to protect him from the very dangers the outside world seemed to embody that night. His disappearance is a chilling testament to the fact that evil, or perhaps just inexplicable tragedy, does not respect boundaries. It does not care about locked doors or sacred spaces. It can manifest anywhere, anytime, leaving behind only questions and a silence that echoes louder than any scream. Today, Chaim Weiss would be in his early 50s. His parents have never stopped searching, never stopped hoping for an answer. The Mesivta of Long Beach still operates, forever marked by the ghost of the boy who disappeared from room 307. The police file remains open, a cold case waiting for a break that may never come. The story of Chaim Weiss is the ultimate Halloween nightmare because it is real and it is unresolved. It's a locked room without a key. It's a face on a missing poster that never fades. It's a chilling reminder that sometimes the darkness doesn't need a mask. Sometimes it just needs an opportunity. And sometimes the silence it leaves behind is the most terrifying sound of all. We have just explored the hushed, hallowed halls of a yeshiva, where a boy vanished from a locked room, leaving behind a silence as profound as the faith practiced within those walls. The Chaim Weiss case is a chilling study in isolation, a mystery bound by the unique codes of a closed community. It's a disappearance that feels almost supernatural in its lack of explanation. But our next story pulls us out of that cloistered world and into one that is, on the surface, far more familiar, yet no less baffling. We move forward in time to the cusp of the new millennium, to a place synonymous with youthful energy, academic ambition, and the boisterous rites of passage of American college life. This is a story that begins not with quiet study, but with the pulsing beat of a Halloween party. It begins with costumes, with laughter, with the easy camaraderie of young people navigating their newfound freedom. It begins with all the familiar trappings of a festive night. And it ends, just hours later, with an empty apartment, an idling car found miles away, and a question mark that has hung heavy over a Pennsylvania town for more than 2 decades. This is not a locked room mystery. This is a vanishing act performed in plain sight, on a night when everyone is already in disguise. This is the unsolved Halloween nightmare of Hyun Jong Song, known to her friends as Cindy. The year is 2001. The place is State College, Pennsylvania, the quintessential American college town, home to the sprawling campus of Penn State University. It's a town that swells with energy during the school year, a vibrant hub of students from all corners of the globe, living, learning, and celebrating together. Among them was Cindy Song. She was 21 years old, a South Korean international student in her final year, majoring in integrative arts. Cindy was, by all accounts, a spark. She was described as bright, outgoing, artistic, and incredibly warm. She had embraced American college life, making friends easily, excelling in her studies, and known for her infectious laugh and her sometimes quirky sense of style. She had worked hard to get here, overcoming challenges and navigating life far from her family in Seoul. She had dreams.
She had plans. She was on the verge of graduating, ready to step into the future she had been building. Halloween night, 2001, fell on a Wednesday. For the students of Penn State, it was an excuse to shed the stress of midterms and embrace the playful spirit of the holiday. Parties were happening all over town. Costumes were donned. The air buzzed with excitement. Cindy Song was part of that celebration. She had put together a costume, a bunny, complete with ears and a tail. She met up with friends and headed to a large Halloween party at Players Nightclub, a popular spot just off campus. The party was crowded, loud, and festive. Cindy was seen laughing, dancing, and socializing with her friends. It was, by all accounts, a typical college Halloween night. She was having fun. She was safe, surrounded by people she knew. As the night wore on, the party began to wind down. Around 2 a.m. on the morning of November 1st, Cindy and a group of her friends decided to leave Players. They piled into a friend's car. The plan was to head to another friend's apartment nearby to continue hanging out. They arrived at the second location, the Meridian apartment complex, just a short drive away. But Cindy, perhaps tired from the long night, decided not to go in. She asked her friends to just drop her off at her own apartment, which was located just a few blocks further down the road in the State College Park Apartments complex on West Clinton Avenue. Her friends agreed. They drove the short distance. They pulled up outside her building around 4 a.m. They watched as Cindy got out of the car. She waved goodbye. They watched her walk towards the entrance of her apartment building, and then they drove away. That wave goodbye, that brief moment under the streetlights of a quiet college town street in the pre-dawn hours, was the last time anyone can definitively say they saw Cindy Song. The next day, Thursday, November 1st, began like any other. But as the hours passed, Cindy's friends started to notice her absence. She wasn't answering her phone. She wasn't responding to messages. This was unusual. Cindy was social, always connected. A friend, concerned, went to her apartment later that day. What they found was not immediately alarming, but deeply unsettling. The apartment door was unlocked. Inside, things seemed mostly normal, but slightly off. Cindy's purse was there, her keys were there. Her bunny costume, the one she had worn the night before, was laid out on her bed, as if she had taken it off upon arriving home. Her backpack, the one she always carried, containing her laptop, her wallet, her cell phone, and personal items, was gone. Also missing were her contact lenses and her glasses. Cindy had very poor eyesight and would not have gone anywhere, especially not willingly, without one or the other. The friend called the police. The initial response was measured. College students sometimes took impromptu trips, sometimes needed space. But the details were troubling. The unlocked door, the costume left behind, the missing backpack containing all her essentials, and the missing glasses or contacts. This didn't fit the profile of someone who had simply decided to leave. The State College Police Department began an investigation. They interviewed the friends who had dropped her off. Their story was consistent. They saw her walk towards her building around 4 a.m. They didn't see her go inside, but they had no reason to suspect anything was wrong. They interviewed attendees from the party at Players. Had anyone seen her talking to someone suspicious? Had she seemed upset? No one reported anything out of the ordinary. She had been her usual happy self. They searched her apartment meticulously. There were no signs of forced entry, no signs of a struggle, no blood, no indication of violence. It was, much like the Chaim Weiss case, a scene defined by an absence, not by evidence of a crime. But unlike Chaim Weiss, Cindy hadn't vanished from within her locked room. She had vanished, it seemed, sometime after she was dropped off,
either just outside her building, or perhaps after she had entered her apartment and then left again, or been taken from it. The timeline was frustratingly narrow, yet maddeningly vague. She was last seen around 4 a.m. Her absence was noted later that day. What had happened in those intervening hours? The investigation quickly hit a wall. There were no witnesses to anything unusual happening outside her apartment building in those pre-dawn hours. No security cameras captured her movements or anyone else's. Then, a potential lead emerged. A male acquaintance of Cindy's, a man named Hugo Marcus Selensky. Though his connection and name details varied in reports, the core story remained. Came forward with a strange story. He claimed that he had been near Cindy's apartment complex early that morning, dealing with a minor car issue. He said he saw Cindy, visibly upset, being forced into a dark-colored car by 2 or 3 unknown men. He claimed he tried to intervene, but was threatened, and the car sped off. This account, if true, was explosive. It was the only eyewitness account of a possible abduction. But Marcus's story had problems. His timeline was inconsistent. His description of the events changed under questioning. And crucially, he hadn't reported this dramatic incident immediately. He waited. Why? Furthermore, Marcus himself had a troubled history, including run-ins with the law. His credibility was questionable. Was he telling the truth? Was he involved himself and trying to deflect suspicion? Or was his entire story a fabrication, perhaps an attempt to insert himself into a high-profile investigation? Police could never fully verify his account, and it remained a frustrating, unconfirmed tangent in the case. The search for Cindy intensified. Her face, a bright smile radiating warmth, was on flyers distributed across State College and beyond. Her family, alerted in South Korea, was frantic. They couldn't understand how their daughter could simply vanish from a safe American college town. They flew to the United States, desperate for answers, their grief compounded by the distance and the language barrier. Weeks passed. Thanksgiving came and went. The investigation was yielding nothing. Cindy Song, the vibrant art student, the beloved friend, the cherished daughter, was gone without a trace. And then, a bizarre and chilling discovery reignited the case, plunging it into even deeper mystery. On November 16, 2001, roughly 2 weeks after Cindy's disappearance, her car, a white 1995 Mitsubishi 3000 GT, was found. But it wasn't found in State College. It was found over 150 miles away in the city of Philadelphia. It was parked in a busy, somewhat rough neighborhood in West Philadelphia, near 7th and Cherry Streets. And the circumstances were deeply disturbing. The car was running, the engine was idling, the hazard lights were flashing, the doors were locked. Inside the car, police found items that didn't belong to Cindy. Receipts from businesses she had never frequented, food wrappers from places she hadn't been. But there was no sign of Cindy herself. And crucially, there was no sign of her missing backpack, her laptop, her wallet, or her cell phone. How had her car gotten here? Who had driven it? Why was it left running with the hazards on? Was it meant to be found? Was it a deliberate clue? Or was it simply abandoned after being used in some other crime? The location, Philadelphia, added another layer of confusion. Did Cindy have connections there? Had she gone there willingly, or had she been taken there against her will? Investigators explored her life, looking for any link to the city. They found none. The discovery of the car was a major break, but instead of providing answers, it only deepened the mystery. It confirmed that Cindy had likely met with foul play. It suggested that someone else had possession of her vehicle after her disappearance, but it offered no clue as to who that person was or where Cindy might be. The investigation shifted focus to Philadelphia.
Had anyone seen the car being parked? Had anyone seen the driver? Police canvassed the neighborhood, but came up empty. The car seemed to have materialized out of nowhere. Back in State College, the case grew colder.
The initial media frenzy faded. Cindy's family, heartbroken and exhausted, eventually returned to South Korea, leaving behind a team of private investigators and the enduring hope that their daughter would someday be found. Years turned into a decade, then two. The file on Cindy's song remained open but inactive. New leads were scarce. Potential sightings were reported, but none were ever confirmed. The theories, however, continued to circulate, fueled by the unsettling details and the lack of closure. Theory 1. Abduction by stranger. This theory hinges on the idea that someone saw Cindy, alone, walking to her apartment in the early morning hours and seized the opportunity. Halloween night, with its inherent chaos and costumed figures, would provide the perfect cover. The perpetrator could have forced her into a car, perhaps even her own car initially. This theory aligns with the Hugo Marcus account, if it's believed, and could explain the car being found so far away in Philadelphia. The motive could have been anything from robbery to something far darker. The lack of a ransom demand suggests the motive wasn't purely financial. Theory 2. Abduction by acquaintance. Did someone Cindy knew, perhaps someone from the party, follow her home? Or perhaps someone she knew encountered her outside her apartment? This theory brings suspicion back to the people she interacted with that night. Was there someone at Players who had shown an unhealthy interest? Was there a conflict or a secret relationship her friends didn't know about? This theory is harder to prove without any specific person of interest, but it remains a possibility, especially given the unlocked state of her apartment, suggesting she might have let someone in or been confronted just as she arrived. Hugo Marcus, again, fits into this category, though no concrete evidence ever linked him to her disappearance. Theory 3. Foul play after arriving home. This theory suggests Cindy did make it safely into her apartment. She took off her costume. Perhaps she was preparing for bed, or perhaps she decided to go out again for some reason, though leaving without her contacts, glasses, makes this unlikely. Did someone knock on her door? Did she let them in? Or did someone break in while she was vulnerable? This scenario could explain the unlocked door and the state of the apartment, but it doesn't easily explain how her car ended up in Philadelphia, unless the perpetrator took her car after harming her in the apartment. Theory 4. Voluntary disappearance. This is the least likely theory, given the evidence. A 21-year-old student on the verge of graduation, with strong family ties and a vibrant social life, doesn't typically vanish willingly, leaving behind her purse, keys, contacts, and car, only for it to reappear miles away. There was no indication she was unhappy or wanting to escape her life. This theory is largely dismissed by investigators and her family. The discovery of her car in Philadelphia remains the most tantalizing and frustrating clue. Who drove it there? Why leave it running? Some speculate it was deliberately staged to mislead investigators, to make them think she had traveled east, while something had actually happened back in State College. Others believe the car was used by the perpetrators to flee and then simply abandoned when it was no longer needed, perhaps after running out of gas or developing mechanical trouble. The idling engine and hazard lights could have been a final, panicked act before fleeing on foot. In the years since 2001, the digital landscape has changed dramatically. Cell phone tracking, widespread surveillance cameras, social media footprints, tools that might have cracked the case wide open were either non-existent or in their infancy back then. Cindy's song vanished in that narrow gap between the old ways of investigation and the new. Her family in South Korea has never given up hope. They maintain websites and social media pages dedicated to her memory, sharing her story, pleading for information. For them, the pain is compounded by the distance. They are separated not just by miles, but by a cultural and linguistic chasm from the place where their daughter disappeared. They rely on the kindness of strangers and the persistence of cold case detectives to keep her memory alive. The State College Police Department periodically reviews the case. Private investigators, funded by the family, have pursued leads, but the trail remains stubbornly cold. What happened to Cindy Song after she waved goodbye to her friends on that chilly November morning? Did she make it inside her apartment? Was she confronted at her door? Was she taken by a stranger who saw an opportunity in the pre-dawn quiet? Or was it someone she knew, someone who betrayed her trust? And what is the significance of the car left idling like a mechanical ghost in a Philadelphia neighborhood, miles from where she was last seen? These questions hang in the air, unanswered, year after year. Cindy Song's disappearance is a particularly cruel kind of mystery. It lacks the dramatic, horrifying certainty of a discovered crime scene, like in the Geen case. It lacks the named perpetrator of Bundy or BTK. It lacks even the specific, contained enigma of the Chaim Weiss locked room. It is, instead, a story of evaporation. A young woman full of life and promise walked to her door after a night of harmless fun and simply ceased to be. The transition from celebration to silence was absolute. Her story is a stark reminder of vulnerability, especially for young people living away from home for the first time. It's a reminder that even in a seemingly safe college town, surrounded by friends, the ordinary can curdle into the inexplicable in the blink of an eye. And it is, ultimately, another Halloween nightmare. A night meant for playful scares became the backdrop for a real-life vanishing act, leaving behind only echoes of laughter, an empty bunny costume, an idling car, and a silence that has lasted for over 20 years. Cindy Song remains missing, a ghost in the machine of unsolved cases, her bright smile frozen on a flyer, forever asking the question, "What happened to me?" We have journeyed from the hushed corridors of a religious school, locked in a chilling Sabbath silence, to the vibrant, chaotic energy of a college town Halloween party abruptly extinguished. The disappearances of Chaim Weiss and Cindy Song are starkly different in their settings, yet bound by the same thread of inexplicable vanishing, of lives interrupted without a trace, leaving only questions that echo unanswered through the years. Our next story takes us deeper into the American heartland, to a place even more commonplace, more woven into the fabric of everyday life than a college campus. It takes us to a setting so mundane, so ordinary, that it seems almost impossible for it to become the stage for a dark and enduring mystery. We are going to a laundromat. This is not a story of a dramatic abduction witnessed, however ambiguously, like Cindy Song's potential sighting, nor is it a baffling locked room puzzle like Chaim Weiss's. This is a story about a slow, creeping realization. A story that begins with a simple chore on a festive night and dissolves into a fog of conflicting timelines, questionable alibis, and the deafening silence of a mother who never came home. This is a story set against the backdrop of Halloween's playful chaos, but rooted in the quiet desperation of a life about to change, and the terrifying possibility that someone close decided that change would never happen. This is the unsolved Halloween nightmare of Nikki McCown. The year is 2001. The same year, Cindy Song vanished in Pennsylvania, hundreds of miles away. Another Halloween mystery was unfolding. The place is Richmond, Indiana. a small city nestled in the Whitewater River Valley, close to the Ohio border. It's a town with a proud industrial past, a place built on hard work and close-knit communities. It's the kind of town where everyone seems to know everyone else, where gossip travels fast, and where secrets, people assume, are hard to keep. In this town lived Marilyn Nikki Nicole McCown. She was 28 years old, a young mother with a bright smile and a future she was actively, excitedly planning. Nikki was described by friends and family as outgoing, determined, and fiercely devoted to her 9-year-old daughter Peyton. She worked hard, juggling her job as an assistant manager at a local department store with the demands of single motherhood. Life hadn't always been easy for Nikki. She had faced challenges. But in the fall of 2001, things were looking up. She was engaged to be married to a man named Bobby Webster. The wedding was just weeks away, scheduled for mid-November. She had picked out her dress, invitations had been sent. She was, by all accounts, eagerly anticipating this new chapter, a chance to build a stable, two-parent home for her daughter. Her fiancé, Bobby Webster, was a state corrections officer. He presented himself as a solid, dependable partner. However, behind the scenes, the relationship was reportedly not without its tensions. There were whispers of arguments, of control issues, of financial disagreements. But to the outside world, they were a couple preparing for their wedding day. Halloween night 2001 fell on a Wednesday. For Nikki, it was likely a day filled with the usual juggle of work, parenting, and wedding planning. As evening approached, she had one last mundane chore to complete: laundry. Her daughter, Peyton, was spending the night with Nikki's mother, Barbara. Nikki, after finishing her shift at work, spoke to her fiancé, Bobby, on the phone around bonsai 3:30 p.m. She told him she was heading to the Richmond Coin Laundry on South E Street to wash their clothes. It was a routine errand, something she likely did every week. Bobby Webster later told police that he offered to go with her or to do the laundry himself, but Nikki had insisted she would handle it. He said he then went to his mother's house for dinner. Nikki arrived at the laundromat sometime after 5 p.m. The Richmond Coin Laundry was a typical small-town establishment. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Rows of washers and dryers hummed and tumbled. It was likely not very busy on a Halloween evening. People were either out trick-or-treating or home preparing for it. What happened inside that laundromat over the next few hours is the crux of the mystery, pieced together from witness accounts and phone records, yet still frustratingly incomplete. Nikki was seen inside the laundromat by a few other patrons. She was doing her laundry, seemingly alone, seemingly untroubled. She made a phone call to her mother, Barbara, around 7:30 p.m., checking in on her daughter Peyton. Everything seemed normal. Around 9 p.m., a friend of Nikki's reportedly stopped by the laundromat. This friend later told police that Nikki seemed fine, still working on her laundry, but mentioned she was waiting for someone to give her a ride home, as she was having car trouble. This detail, the car trouble and waiting for a ride, would become a significant point of contention. Nikki's fiancé, Bobby Webster, stated that he returned to the laundromat around 9:30 p.m. He said Nikki was still there, folding clothes. He claimed he helped her finish up. They loaded the laundry into her vehicle, a 1990 GMC Jimmy SUV, and he followed her back to her apartment complex. He said he saw her pull into her usual parking spot, watched her get out of the car, and then he drove away, assuming she was safely home. This was approximately muli-mot-the-doi, and that, according to Bobby Webster, was the last time he saw his fiancée. The next morning, Thursday, November 1st, the silence began, mirroring the events unfolding hundreds of miles away in Pennsylvania. Nikki was scheduled to work. She never showed up. Calls to her cell phone went unanswered. Her mother, Barbara, became increasingly worried. Nikki was reliable. She wouldn't just miss work without calling. She wouldn't go silent, especially not with her wedding just weeks away. Barbara contacted Bobby Webster. He claimed he hadn't heard from Nikki since the night before, when he saw her arrive home. Barbara went to Nikki's apartment. The scene was eerily similar to Cindy's songs. The door was unlocked. Inside, the apartment was tidy. There was no sign of a struggle. Nikki's purse was there. Her keys were there. The clean laundry they had supposedly brought home from the laundromat was sitting, neatly folded, on the couch. But Nikki was gone, and her GMC Jimmy SUV was missing from its parking spot. Barbara immediately called the Richmond Police Department. The initial response, again, was cautious, but the details were alarming. The unlocked apartment, the purse and keys left behind, the missing vehicle, and the impending wedding. This didn't seem like a woman who had simply left. The investigation began, and right away it hit inconsistencies, particularly surrounding the timeline at the laundromat and the state of Nikki's vehicle. Bobby Webster's account placed him leaving Nikki safely at her apartment around 10 p.m. But other witnesses from the laundromat offered conflicting information. Some recalled seeing Nikki still at the laundromat after 10 p.m., seemingly alone. And what about the alleged car trouble? Nikki's GMC Jimmy was missing. If it had been having problems, why would she have driven it home? Or, more pointedly, why would someone else drive it away? Police began to focus on Bobby Webster. As the fiancé and the last known person to report seeing Nikki, he was naturally a person of interest. His alibi, that he went to his mother's for dinner and then returned to help Nikki, seemed plausible, but detectives wanted verification. His mother confirmed he had been there, but the exact timing, the comings and goings, remained somewhat fuzzy. Detectives noted Webster's demeanor. He appeared concerned, cooperative. He participated in initial searches. He spoke to the media, pleading for Nikki's safe return. But some observers felt his emotions seemed rehearsed. There was a subtle lack of urgency, a calmness that seemed at odds with the situation. The investigation expanded. Police searched Nikki's apartment again, more thoroughly this time. They found nothing to indicate foul play had occurred inside the apartment. They searched the laundromat. They found nothing out of the ordinary. They began digging into Nikki's life, into her relationships. Was there anyone else who might have wanted to harm her? An ex-boyfriend? A disgruntled coworker? Nikki was well liked. She didn't seem to have any known enemies. All roads seemed to lead back to the impending wedding and the relationship at its center. Were there problems between Nikki and Bobby that weren't apparent to the outside world? Friends and family, when pressed, admitted the relationship had its ups and downs. There had been arguments about finances, about wedding plans, about Bobby's alleged controlling behavior. Nikki had reportedly expressed some doubts, some cold feet, in the weeks leading up to the wedding, confiding in friends that she felt rushed or pressured. Could these tensions have escalated? Could an argument on Halloween night, perhaps at the laundromat, perhaps later, have turned violent? Bobby Webster vehemently denied any problems. He insisted they were happy, looking forward to their life together. He agreed to take a polygraph test. The results, according to police sources cited in media reports, were inconclusive or indicated deception, further deepening suspicion but falling short of concrete proof. Days turned into weeks. The search for Nikki McCown intensified. Flyers with her smiling face were posted all over Richmond and surrounding areas. Volunteers combed through fields and parks. The local media covered the story extensively. But there was no sign of Nikki, and no sign of her GMC Jimmy. Then, 6 days after her disappearance, on November 6, 2001, a major break occurred. Nikki's SUV was found. But it wasn't found in Richmond, Indiana. It was found over 300 miles away, in Dayton, Ohio. It was discovered abandoned in the parking lot of the desolate, run-down walk-through apartment complex called Jefferson Village West, or sometimes referred to as the DeSoto Bass Complex. The complex had a reputation for crime. The discovery was bizarre. The vehicle was locked. There was no visible damage. Inside, police found Nikki's neatly folded laundry, the same laundry that Bobby Webster claimed they had loaded into the car and brought back to her apartment on Halloween night. This immediately contradicted Webster's statement. If the laundry was still in the car, found 300 miles away, how could it also have been on her couch in Richmond? Forensic teams processed the vehicle meticulously. They were looking for any trace, hairs, fibers, fingerprints, DNA, that could point to who had driven the car to Dayton and what might have happened to Nikki. The results were frustratingly minimal. They found no clear signs of a struggle within the vehicle. They found no definitive forensic evidence linking anyone specific to the car's abandonment. The discovery of the car in Dayton only deepened the mystery. Why Dayton? Did Nikki have connections there? Had she gone there willingly? Or had she been taken there against her will, perhaps in her own vehicle? Investigators learned that Bobby Webster, Nikki's fiancé, had family connections in the Dayton area. This fact, combined with the contradictory laundry evidence and the polygraph results, placed him firmly at the center of the investigation. Had Bobby Webster's account of Halloween night been a fabrication? Had something happened to Nikki at the laundromat or shortly after leaving it? Had he then, investigators theorized, driven her car, perhaps with her inside, perhaps not, to Dayton, an area he knew, abandoned it in a rough neighborhood, hoping it wouldn't be found quickly, and then returned to Richmond to play the part of the concerned fiancé? It was a compelling theory, but it was just that, a theory. There was no direct evidence tying Bobby Webster to Dayton on those specific days. There was no forensic evidence linking him to the abandoned vehicle. And most importantly, there was still no sign of Nikki McCown. The investigation in Dayton yielded few leads. No witnesses saw the car being parked. No one saw the driver. The trail went cold again, this time hundreds of miles from where it began. Back in Richmond, the community was heartbroken and frustrated. Nikki's mother, Barbara, became a tireless advocate for her daughter, never letting the case fade from public view. She organized searches, she held vigils, she spoke to the media constantly, her grief mixed with a fierce determination to find answers. Bobby Webster, meanwhile, remained under a cloud of suspicion, but was never charged. The wedding date came and went. Life in Richmond moved on, but the question lingered. What happened to Nikki? Over the years, the theories continued to swirl, much like the leaves on a windy Halloween night. Theory 1. Foul play involving the fiancé. This remains the most prominent theory, held by many investigators and Nikki's family. The inconsistencies in Bobby Webster's timeline, the discovery of the laundry in the car in Dayton, where he had connections, the alleged relationship troubles, and the inconclusive polygraph results all point towards his potential involvement. Did an argument escalate on Halloween night? Did he harm Nikki, perhaps accidentally or intentionally, and then stage her disappearance, driving her car to Dayton to create distance and confusion? Without a confession or definitive forensic evidence, this remains unproven, a heavy suspicion that hangs in the air. Theory 2. Abduction by stranger at the laundromat. Could Nikki have been targeted by someone else entirely? Laundromats, especially late at night, can be isolated places. Was someone watching her? Did someone approach her when she was alone? If she was indeed having car trouble, as one friend reported, she might have been particularly vulnerable, perhaps accepting a ride from the wrong person. This theory could potentially explain the car ending up in Dayton if the abductor drove it there. However, the lack of any witnesses, any signs of struggle at the laundromat, and the targeted nature of abandoning the car in a city linked to the fiancé make this theory less likely for many. Theory 3. Voluntary disappearance due to pre-wedding stress. Could Nikki, overwhelmed by wedding plans or having second thoughts about the marriage, have simply decided to leave? Could she have staged her own disappearance, driving her car to Dayton and then vanishing? This theory seems highly improbable. Nikki was deeply devoted to her daughter and, by all accounts, excited about the wedding, despite any underlying jitters. Leaving her purse, keys, and daughter behind, and orchestrating such an elaborate vanishing act seems completely out of character. Furthermore, in the 2 decades since, there has never been a credible sighting, never a trace of her using her identity elsewhere. Theory 4. Foul play by an unknown third party with a hidden motive. Is it possible there was someone else in Nikki's life, someone unknown to her family or even Bobby Webster, who had a reason to harm her? A secret relationship? A debt? A past conflict? Investigators explored these avenues but found nothing. Nikki lived a relatively open life in a small town. It seems unlikely she harbored a secret dangerous enough to lead to her disappearance without anyone knowing. The case of Nikki McCown is frustrating because it sits in a gray area. There is a strong person of interest, but not enough evidence to charge him. There are conflicting clues, the laundry, the car trouble, that muddy the timeline. There is the haunting backdrop of Halloween, a night that provides easy cover for unusual activity. What happened between the time Nikki was last seen folding clothes at the Richmond Coin Laundry and the moment her idling SUV was discovered in a Dayton parking lot? Did she make it home, as her fiancé claimed? Or did her journey end somewhere between the hum of the dryers and her front door? Her mother, Barbara, never stopped searching, never stopped demanding answers until her own passing several years ago. Nikki's daughter, Peyton, grew up without her mother, her childhood defined by this gaping, unanswered question. The Richmond Police Department still lists the case as open and active. Periodically, new detectives review the files, hoping for a fresh perspective, a missed clue. Advances in technology, particularly in DNA and digital forensics, though limited given the 2001 timeframe, offer a faint glimmer of hope. Perhaps a re-examination of evidence from the car or the discovery of some long-forgotten electronic record could provide the missing piece. But for now, Nikki McCown remains missing. Her disappearance is another Halloween nightmare, one made all the more chilling by its ordinary setting. It's a story that reminds us that danger doesn't always announce itself with a grotesque mask or a sudden violent act. Sometimes it emerges quietly from the mundane routines of life. Sometimes the most terrifying place isn't a dark alley or an isolated wood, but a brightly lit laundromat on a Wednesday night where someone you know or someone you don't decides your future is over. Nikki McCown went to do her laundry and simply never came back, leaving behind a neatly folded pile of clothes and a mystery as gold as the November wind. We have walked the silent, sacred corridors where a boy vanished from a locked room, leaving a void that faith itself could not fill. We have stood under the streetlights of a college town, peering into the pre-dawn darkness where a vibrant young woman waved goodbye and disappeared forever. We have lingered in the humming, fluorescent glow of a small-town laundromat, the scene of a mother's last known moments before she and her car were spirited away. These stories, Chaim Weiss, Cindy Song, Nikki McCown, are united by absence. They are defined by the faces on missing posters, by the lingering questions of where and why. They are Halloween nightmares rooted in the terror of the unknown, the fear that someone we love can simply cease to be, swallowed by the darkness. But our final story flips the script. This is not about a person who vanished into the unknown. This is about a person who emerged from it. This is not a story about a missing person flyer. This is the story of a Jane Doe. It begins not with a frantic search, but with a grim discovery. It unfolds not as a desperate hunt for a loved one, but as a decades-long, painstaking quest to simply give a name back to a soul who had hers stolen. And it occurs, once again, against the backdrop of Halloween, a date that seems, in the annals of true crime, to attract a particular kind of darkness. This is the story of a young woman known for 40 years only by the single, poignant clue found with her remains. This is the story of Orange Socks. Our journey takes us south to the vast open spaces of Texas. The date is October 31st, 1979, Halloween. In Georgetown, Texas, a city just north of Austin, the day was likely unfolding with the usual mix of autumn chill and anticipation for the night's festivities. Children were preparing their costumes. Parents were stocking up on candy. But along Interstate 35, a major artery cut through the heart of Texas, the world kept moving. Cars and trucks sped past fields and farmland, indifferent to the holiday. Sometime that day, a passerby noticed something out of place. Lying in a concrete drainage culvert beneath an overpass on I-35, partially concealed by overgrown weeds, was what appeared to be a human form. Law enforcement was called to the scene, and what they found was a tragedy stripped bare of all identity. It was the body of a young woman. She had been there for some time, exposed to the elements. She was lying face down. She was wearing only a pair of orange knee-high socks. Nothing else. No clothes. No identification. No purse. No jewelry except for a single, small, abalone shell ring on her finger. The location was desolate, anonymous. A place chosen, it seemed, precisely because it was nowhere. A place where someone could be discarded and perhaps never found. The initial investigation by the Williamson County Sheriff's Office was hampered by the complete lack of identifying information. Who was she? Where did she come from? How did she end up here, in this ditch, on Halloween? The autopsy revealed she was likely between 15 and 30 years old. She was Caucasian, with long, brownish auburn hair, approximately 10 inches in length. She stood about 5 foot born to 5'7" tall. She had received good dental care, suggesting she wasn't necessarily transient or living completely off the grid. She had also had an appendectomy scar. Her toenails were painted pink, small, humanizing details on a canvas of utter anonymity. The cause of her passing was clear: asphyxiation. She had been deprived of air. And based on the state of her remains, the medical examiner estimated she had been placed in that culvert sometime between 1 and 3 weeks prior to her discovery on Halloween. But who was she? Detectives began the painstaking, often fruitless, work of trying to identify a Jane Doe. They checked missing persons reports from Williamson County, from surrounding counties, from across Texas, and eventually across the nation. They ran her fingerprints through state and federal databases. No matches. They released descriptions to the media. Brownish hair, orange socks, the abalone ring. Did anyone recognize her? Did anyone know a young woman who fit this description, who had recently gone missing? Leads trickled in, but none panned out. The orange socks, the most striking detail, became her moniker. She was logged into the National Database of Unidentified Persons as Williamson County Jane Doe, case number 799398.
But to the detectives who worked her case, and later to the online communities dedicated to solving cold cases, she became simply Orange Socks. The investigation into her passing was just as difficult as the search for her identity. Who could have done this? Was it a local? Was it someone passing through on the busy I-35 corridor? The location, right off the interstate, suggested the perpetrator could have come from anywhere and disappeared just as easily. There was little forensic evidence at the scene beyond the body itself. The culvert, exposed to the elements, had washed away any potential footprints or tire tracks. The technology of 19 by knee limited what could be gleaned from the few fibers or hairs collected. The case quickly went cold. Orange Socks became another statistic, another Jane Doe file gathering dust in a sheriff's office cabinet. Another name lost, another story untold. She was a ghost, haunting the edges of the Texas highway. But the story does not end there, because while Orange Socks remained anonymous, the man responsible for her fate was, at that very moment, embarking on a journey that would make him one of the most infamous figures in American criminal history. In 1983, 4 years after the discovery of Orange Socks, a drifter named Henry Lee Lucas was arrested in Texas. Lucas was a rough, uneducated man with a low IQ and a chillingly casual demeanor. Initially arrested for unlawful possession of a firearm, he began to talk and talk and talk. He started by confessing to the recent passings of 2 women, his young traveling companion, Frida Becky Powell, and an elderly woman named Kate Rich. But then, prompted by investigators eager to clear cold cases, Lucas opened the floodgates. He began confessing to hundreds, literally hundreds, of unsolved homicides across the country. He claimed to have traveled coast to coast for years, sometimes alone, sometimes with his equally disturbed accomplice Otis Toole, leaving a trail of victims in their wake. He provided details, sometimes vague, sometimes surprisingly specific, about cases that had baffled police for decades. Law enforcement agencies across the United States were ecstatic. They had, they believed, captured the most prolific serial perpetrator in history. A task force, the Lucas Task Force, was formed in Texas to coordinate the massive investigation, flying Lucas around the country to point out crime scenes and provide confessions. He became a media sensation, the confession killer. He reveled in the attention, the power he held over investigators. And among the hundreds of cases Henry Lee Lucas confessed to was the passing of the unidentified young woman found in a culvert in Georgetown, Texas on Halloween 1979, the woman known only as Orange Socks. Lucas provided details. He said he had picked her up hitchhiking near Oklahoma. He couldn't remember her name. He said they had argued. He claimed he had ended her life, then driven south into Texas and left her body in the ditch off I-35. His confession seemed plausible. He was known to travel that route. His timeline fit. And he provided just enough detail about the location to convince the Williamson County Sheriff's Office. In 1982, Henry Lee Lucas was convicted of the capital murder of Orange Socks Jane Doe. He was sentenced to his end for her passing, adding to the multiple life sentences he was already facing for other crimes. Case closed, or so it seemed. The conviction brought a sense of finality, but not true closure. The perpetrator had a name, but the victim still did not. She remained Orange Socks, and for her unknown family, somewhere out there, the nightmare continued. Furthermore, the foundation upon which Lucas's conviction was built, his own confessions, began to crumble almost immediately. Investigative journalists, notably Hugh Ainsworth, and later, even some within law enforcement, began to pick apart Lucas's claims.
They found massive inconsistencies. They found documented proof, work records, traffic tickets, even jail records that placed Lucas hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles away from the crimes he was confessing to on the dates they occurred. It became increasingly clear that Henry Lee Lucas was not the cross-country superkiller he claimed to be. He was a pathological liar, a manipulator, who had learned that confessing to crimes he read about in newspapers provided to him by investigators, was a way to get privileges, better food, trips out of his cell, attention, power. The Lucas task force, under intense pressure to clear cases, had, it seemed, inadvertently fed him details, coached him, and accepted confessions that were demonstrably false. It was a massive, systemic failure, driven by confirmation bias and the seductive allure of easy answers. Lucas eventually recanted most of his confessions, including the one for orange socks. He claimed he couldn't have done it, that he was elsewhere. The legal battle over his credibility raged for years. In 1998, just days before his scheduled execution, primarily for the orange socks conviction, as his other sentences were for life, then-Governor George W. Bush commuted Lucas's death sentence to life in prison. The reason? Significant doubts had been raised about his guilt, specifically in the orange socks case. An investigation by the Texas Attorney General's office had found compelling evidence suggesting Lucas could not have been in Georgetown, Texas, during the time frame the victim likely perished. Henry Lee Lucas would pass away in prison from natural causes in 2001, leaving behind a legacy not of prolific evil, but of prolific deceit, and a cloud of doubt over hundreds of cases he had supposedly solved. And for Orange Socks, she was back to square one. Her convicted killer was likely not her killer at all. Her identity remained unknown. Her case was, once again, truly cold. But the story does not end in that culvert or in the confused confessions of a liar. It continues, quietly, persistently, in the labs and databases where science works to give names back to the nameless. For decades, the case file of Orange Socks sat, waiting for a new lead, a new technology. The abalone ring was examined. The orange socks themselves were analyzed. Dental records were compared against countless missing persons files. Nothing matched. Then came the revolution, forensic genealogy. The ability to extract DNA from degraded remains and compare it against public genealogy databases offered a new, powerful tool for identifying John and Jane Does. Cases that had been cold for half a century were suddenly being solved. In the late 2010s, the Williamson County Sheriff's Office, under Sheriff Robert Chody, decided to give Orange Socks one more chance. They partnered with the DNA Doe Project, a nonprofit organization dedicated to using investigative genetic genealogy to identify the unknown. Extracting a viable DNA profile from remains that had been exposed to the harsh Texas elements for weeks and then stored for decades was a monumental challenge. But the forensic scientists persisted. They managed to obtain a partial profile. That profile was uploaded to public genealogy databases like GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA, and the search began. Genealogists, volunteers working tirelessly, began building family trees, looking for connections, searching for distant cousins whose DNA might overlap with Jane Doe's. It was like assembling a million-piece puzzle with only a handful of edge pieces to start. They worked backward, generation by generation, tracing lines, looking for intersections. And then, in 1919, 40 years after her discovery, they found it. A connection. a distant relative whose DNA matched closely enough to narrow down the search to a specific family line. Investigators contacted potential family members. They explained their search. They asked for DNA samples for comparison. And they found a match, a close match, a sibling. On August 7, 2019, the Williamson County Sheriff's Office held a press conference. The room was filled with reporters, cold case enthusiasts, and the palpable weight of 4 decades of mystery. Sheriff Chody stepped up to the microphone. He announced that Williamson County Jane Doe, the woman known for 40 years only as Orange Socks, finally had her name back. Her name was Deborah Louise Jackson. She was 23 years old when her life was taken. She was from Abilene, Texas. She had left home in 1977 seeking independence. She had worked various jobs, including waitressing at a Ramada Inn in Amarillo and, later, at the Burks Memorial Hospital in Oklahoma. She had kept in intermittent contact with her family, but had essentially vanished from their lives in 19 Bayite, a year before her body was found. Her family had never stopped looking, never stopped wondering. But without the tools of modern communication and forensic science, finding a young woman who had chosen to disconnect was an almost impossible task back then. They had reported her missing, but the dots were never connected across jurisdictions. The identification was a moment of profound, bittersweet relief. Relief that she finally had her name back, that her story could be told. Bittersweet because it confirmed the loss they had feared for 4 decades. Deborah Jackson was no longer case number by Chin Ba Chin. She was no longer just a pair of orange socks found on Halloween. She was a daughter, a sister, a young woman with a life, hopes, and a future that had been stolen from her. The identification also reignited the question of her passing. If Henry Lee Lucas didn't do it, who did? With her identity confirmed, investigators could now build a timeline of her final year. They learned she had been working in Oklahoma in 1978. She had told friends she was planning to return to Texas. She was last seen by her family in Abilene in 1978. There is a gap between then and her estimated time of passing in October 1979. Where was she? Who was she with? The investigation into her final days and into the person responsible for her end continues. Lucas remains a suspect in the minds of some, despite the evidence contradicting his confession. Others believe the perpetrator was someone else entirely, perhaps someone she met during her travels, someone whose path crossed hers briefly, fatally. The abalone ring she wore was traced back to a specific region in Florida, suggesting she may have traveled there at some point. The orange socks themselves remain an enigma. Were they a favorite pair? Were they significant? Or were they just the last thing she happened to be wearing? The story of Deborah Louise Jackson, the woman once known as Orange Socks, is a different kind of Halloween nightmare. It's not about the terror of a single night, but about the long, slow, grinding horror of anonymity. It's about the decades spent as an unknown, a file number, a pair of socks in an evidence locker. Her story is also, ultimately, a story of hope. It's a testament to the tireless dedication of investigators who refuse to let her case go cold, and to the power of science to reclaim identities lost to time and violence. She was found on Halloween, a day associated with masks and hidden identities. And it took 40 Halloweens passing before her own mask of anonymity was finally lifted, revealing the face of a young woman named Deborah. Her case serves as a poignant conclusion to our exploration of Halloween horrors. It reminds us that behind every unsolved case, behind every Jane and John Doe, there is a person, a name, a family, a story waiting to be told. And it reminds us that the quest for truth, no matter how long it takes, is the only way to truly honor their memory, and perhaps, finally, allow their spirits to rest. The monsters may be real. The mysteries may endure, but the fight to restore dignity, to speak the names of the lost, is a light that even the darkest Halloween night cannot extinguish.